Okay. Woo! Woo! You guys really want to attend this?
Yes.
Okay.
We love you, Tim.
I'm really tired. No, it's okay. It's okay. For some reason, I spent weeks on the PowerPoint and it just didn't really come together, so I'm hoping it'll somehow come together right now. That'd be cool. Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about an archetype that's very near and dear to my heart. Really profound, really deep. How many of you attended Patricia's thing earlier, the regression? Yeah, that's awesome, because this is going to be very related. This is a centaur planet that can very much tell us about our complexes. And so originally I was going to set up the chairs in a circle because what I would like to do after we get to know the archetype and how he correlates to the chart is share some personal experiences for anybody who is willing about their own Chiron story, which is a journey of healing. And so we'll begin by looking at the archetype, some of his myths. I don't want to spend too long there. And then we'll start to get into some of the depth, the richness of the meaning of what this point in our chart and this reflection of nature really tells us about ourselves. And so the word Chiron itself, first we'll start with this quote. The wound is the place where the light enters you. This is Chiron, the wounded healer. It's both where we experience woundedness in our life in some way, shape, or form, and that is simultaneously what initiates us on our healing journey in order to heal ourselves, which inevitably transforms us into becoming healers. And so there's really a coming full circle that can be experienced with Chiron if we are committed to our healing journey. This is an underworld planet. This does take us into our shadow. This does take us into the painful places. And yet, as we bring our awareness into such places, it allows for discoveries to happen, realizations to happen, that not only can heal us on our journey, but also can be shared with others. So the word Chiron, Ker means hand. Centron means the goat. And obviously this is associated with healing. Hands-on healing, energy healing, medicinal healing. Chiron is the hand of God in many respects. And there is a dual significance to Chiron being a centaur. Top half man, bottom half animal. And so Centron, the goat, we have this goat symbolism which climbs. There's a path. There's work to be done. There's persistence symbolized with the goat. Overcoming obstacles, a very Capricorn type of symbol, of course. And with Capricorn is accountability. Accountability for our own healing journey is a very important aspect of what Chiron is. Now these colors I chose back here, I associate this type of colors, the feeling evoked from those colors with Chiron. Sometimes he's associated with the Pleiades, which is this healing cluster of stars. And these colors too are very healing colors. Now, in Chiron's own mythology, he has a very interesting birth situation. His father is Kronos, is Saturn, Father Time. Not the nicest character in his myths. He assumes the form of a horse in order to procreate with his, well, it's not his wife, because we all know how the Greek Roman gods are.
Those animals.
Yeah. Sort of setting a strange precedent. Philyra, his wife, is not his wife. Oh my goodness. Procreated with Philyra as a horse. Philyra is a sea nymph. And this brought forth the centaur Chiron. Now, he's got some good genes because Kronos' parents are Uranus and Gaia. And so in Greek mythology, the centaurs, they're pretty ruthless, barbaric, animalistic, sex and drinking and fighting. And Chiron is the centaur that really stands out. He really overcomes his animal nature. And that's part of his significance. And yet when he is born, father immediately goes away, abandons him. He's not going to be a part of raising Chiron. And his mother is so horrified by how ugly Chiron is when he's born. There's two different stories. One of them, she just goes back to the sea, totally ditches him, and in the other one, she's so horrified, she turns into a tree. Now, this is symbolic in itself because here we have a story of the wounded child, wounded innocence, and abandonment associated with Chiron from the moment of his birth. Fortunately, he is adopted by Apollo, the sun god, which is significant in itself because Apollo is a hero, is a teacher of heroes, and Apollo is who teaches Chiron, who raises Chiron, who departs wisdom onto Chiron. And the wisdom of Apollo, the sun, is what? We've been talking about it all week. To be all that you are, to be authentic, to creatively actualize. It is the life-giving force that just releases its solar rays, impregnating the planets with life. And there's also this wisdom of death and resurrection with the sun. Yeah, the sun rises, the sun sets, the sun comes again, rises, falls, comes again. And of course we have the wisdom of the heart, the sun being departed to Chiron. Chiron does have a family in his mythology. This is his wife, Chirico, who is another centaur in terms of the centaur planets in our astronomy. She is also a shaman, and she is the consort of Athena. They have a daughter, Thea, who is also a master astrologer and seer. This is where Chiron lives. This is the cave, Mount Pelion. Can't you see a bunch of centaurs just kind of chilling there, hanging out?
Where is that?
This is in Greece, I believe. So he's a teacher of heroes, Chiron. He really has an amazing reputation for the souls that he assists throughout his life. He helps Hercules through his 12 labors. He helps Jason get the golden fleece. What's the other one? Yeah, he teaches Asclepios, who is considered a master physician. So much so he had the power to raise the dead. So Chiron is the teacher of the greatest heroes, of the greatest healers in the Greek-Roman paradigm. Here he is raising Achilles, teaching him how to play the lyre. Now this is interesting too because Chiron adopts these heroes. Chiron is the figure that if there is an abandoned son, if somebody has the destiny to be a hero, they bring them to Chiron. And so, just like Chiron himself, Achilles is abandoned by his mother, and Chiron takes him in. And that in itself is one of the symbols for who Chiron is. He experiences this wound, abandoned by his mother, and he is the healer of others with similar woundedness. He is healing another who was abandoned by their mother. So he's a master herbalist. The quote is that he creates medicines for animals doubting their lives, restoring life. He sings songs of heroes upon the lyre. And here he is teaching Achilles about the lyre. He looks a little uncertain, but he'll grow into it. Now, when Chiron is wounded, this is also symbolic as it's his lower nature that is wounded. And it's sort of an ironic story. He helps Hercules through these 12 labors, is responsible for helping him to get through this. And then afterwards there's this crisis where, there's this wine that Hercules wants to pop open to celebrate, and the centaurs go crazy because it's their special wine, and the poison arrows that Hercules collects on his journey starts to get fired at the centaurs, and everybody dies. It's amazing. It's very sort of anticlimactic almost. And Chiron is hit with an arrow himself, and he's left with this incredible pain, this wound that will not be healed. And he goes searching for this wound, or for this cure for his wound that will not be healed. And he can heal everybody but himself. This is one of the Chiron qualities. Someone with a very strong Chiron signature in their chart may have this sense themselves. It's I can give to everybody else, I can help everybody else, but on my own healing journey, it's a tremendous burden. And that's the initiation, which we will talk about, into becoming a real healer, which is not necessarily a lighthearted initiation into becoming a shaman. which is what Chiron very much represents. So here he is. He is half man, half horse. And of course the centaur is a symbol for humanity. Chiron is going to be a symbol for the human experience. And the human being, unlike any other being, is on the margins between the upper worlds and the lower worlds. And of course the shaman is the only being capable of traveling between the upper worlds and the lower worlds. And this is how he is able to perform his healing. And we'll talk about the significance and the meaning of what and the advantage of being on the margins. But of course this is a full spectrum experience. And so the godly nature of Chiron is responsible for overcoming the animal nature of his lower nature. And this is our aspiration as human beings, is that we too can overcome our lower nature. We too can overcome our wounded lower nature. We're born into a world where our lower nature is pretty much destined to be wounded in today's day and age. We don't have sexuality under control. We don't have good medicine. We don't have good food. This is all rather low physical stuff that keeps us imprisoned in these very limited types of consciousness. And yet by discovering the medicines, the healing path, this is how we overcome these things. And when we find those keys, which Chiron is certainly the key in the chart, even his glyph looks like a key, then we have those discoveries to share with others as well. So how does he get out of this situation with this eternal wound that won't get away, this incredible pain that won't go away? And interestingly, Hercules suffers a similar fate. He ingests the same poison, he's on the verge of dying, and he eventually, the gods take pity on him. Interesting how in a lot of these stories, these gods, these goddesses, they become immortalized in the stars because the gods take pity on them. They feel so bad for them that they bring them into this stage of enlightenment. That's interesting in itself. So how does Chiron get out of this? Well, Prometheus, this is where he inevitably becomes immortalized in Centaurus. But before then, Prometheus, the savior of humanity, the sole responsible for bringing fire, divine wisdom to humanity, suffers punishment on the rock. This is a character who is sacrificing himself for humanity as well. A liberator, Prometheus. And Chiron is the liberator of Prometheus himself. Amazing. The hero of heroes, the healer of healers, the liberator of liberators is who Chiron is. And so the arrangement is Prometheus is going to suffer having a raven eating out his liver forever and ever until someone replaces him on the rock who is immortal themselves. Well, Chiron, or who sacrifices their own immortality for Prometheus to be released. Well, Chiron doesn't want to suffer this pain forever, and so there's this exchange that happens where he gives up his own immortality so that way Prometheus can be released. And in response to this, Zeus, who is supposed to represent nature and order, liberates Chiron and immortalizes him in the constellation Centaurus. So it is somewhat of a happy ending, even though it's somewhat of a cathartic one. Very much a catharsis planet here, Chiron. Now, I did want to say that there's many sacrificial beings throughout history, and they all share this similar story of sacrificing themselves, descending into the underworld, and then rising up into the upper world. This is the shamanic process of healing, and it's not just Chiron, it's not just Christ who goes through this experience. Quetzalcoatl burns himself to death. He feels so bad, descends to the underworld for 4 days. Here he is. And then arises again as Venus, the morning star. Osiris, split into tons of pieces, separated throughout the earth. Poor Isis has to reconstruct him together. And the gods feel so bad for him, they make him the lord of the underworld. Inanna, or Ishtar, descends to the underworld, left as a corpse there before being resurrected. Odin hangs himself on the Yggdrasil, the world tree, The tree where the branches go into the sky, the roots go into the underworld. It symbolizes the totality of creation, as above, so below. He hangs himself upon that tree. He's wanting to learn the mysteries of the universe, the magic of the universe, and this is how he does it. He's stabbed in the side with a spear. Sound familiar? And he hangs for 9 days, dies. The light of the world is extinguished, and then born again. Dionysus. He is created from Zeus having sex with Persephone, Hera, Zeus's wife, who is almost always jealous and not really going about it the best way, sends a bunch of titans to shred Dionysus to pieces, and all that is left is his heart. And then Zeus restores Dionysus through his heart. That is how he is resurrected. And that's interesting in itself, because Dionysus is one of the esoteric mystery gods of the Greek-Roman paradigm. He's the god of ecstasy, which is also going to be very much related to this sacrifice, being reborn, lower world, upper world, being on the margins, reverberating back and forth function that Chiron can represent in the chart. And so what we're seeing here is an image called the Temptation of St. Anthony. And I think this image is a perfect depiction of shamanic initiation, which is not a fun or easy process. I don't think anybody would ever say that. Because it shows the full spectrum of what human experience is, and thus the greatness of overcoming even the darkest, most terrifying experiences. And so the story with St. Anthony is something like he decides to spend the night in a tomb, and he is hunted down by hundreds and hundreds of demons. They torture him in an incredibly painful way. But he survives it. And then he asks God, why did you not, save me? Why did you not rescue me? And God's basically just like, well, I was really impressed, with the fact that you survived that. That sort of says a story about you. And yet this experience of being really shredded to pieces, this can be a Chiron experience. When we have a Chiron transit, it can be like we're being juiced, like we're just being shredded apart, and the life, the blood within us is spilling out. And there's a point where there's a breakdown, and there's a release. And then the juice of life leaves us. The impurities leave us. The old egos, the old stories leave us, and we surrender to an inconceivable nature that is life, that is love. We finally give up. When that happens, that point happens where we finally give up to the experience of being shredded apart. That's the moment that we come into a spiritual transcendence, a type of bliss that is completely inconceivable. It goes completely beyond the good, the bad, the pain, the pleasure of life. Quote from Vance Havner, a Christian writer. God uses broken things. It takes broken soil to produce a crop, broken clouds to give rain, broken grain to give bread, broken bread to give strength. It is the broken alabaster box that gives forth perfume. It is Peter weeping bitterly who returns to the greatest power than ever. It is this full spectrum experience of having our heart broken and ripped open, which initiates us into the deeper and deeper, ever spiraling development of our own love. And so, what do we mean by shamanic process? Well, what does a shaman do? A shaman heals people, right? And oftentimes that healing happens through empathy, through compassion. Is going to be the ultimate quality that comes out of the Chironic experience. Through understanding the pain and suffering of other. Empathy. And for those of you who have empathy, which I assume is going to be all of you, in pretty significant quality, you know what happens when you're around someone who's suffering. You experience their suffering as if it were your own, right? You can't be celebrating your life and having a party and juggling while the person next to you has had their family wiped out in a hurricane, something like that. No, your heart breaks for them. That is what empathy is. And so the shaman, similarly, can heal others through sort of taking on their pain, through experiencing their suffering through them. It is an alleviation for them. It helps that process of movement, of releasing those feelings happen for them by going into those wounds, into that darkness with them. That is what healers and shamans do, willingly, because they're so compassionate and loving. I'm not going to stand by and watch you suffer. I'm going to dive into your suffering with you because I love you. And that diving into their suffering is going to help bring added awareness and illumination to those places, which is what is allowing for the healing to happen. And so this is stigmata. You may have heard of stigmata. You may have heard of great saints even praying for stigmata. That's a pretty freaking far out thing. Praying to suffer. Because they love this symbol, Yeshua, Jesus Christ. They say, I want to experience that suffering with Jesus because I love Him so much. They actually desire to take on that suffering. And such saints and sages have existed who have taken on that suffering, which is essentially taking on collective suffering. And there's this spiritual masochism is what that is called, where there is almost an enjoyment of taking on the collective suffering. I'm not going to say that it isn't experienced as suffering. It is experienced as suffering, but there's an enjoyment of it because it is a participation in the suffering of that which you love the most in their moment of crisis and pain. And so again, going into the upper or the lower worlds, what else is the shamanic process? Is as we weave in between these dimensions, we leave a trail of breadcrumbs. That way we can access those places easier and easier when we need to. And there are times when we need to go into the underworld. When someone is suffering, when someone is stuck in their own unconsciousness, we can access their own underworld place of themselves. The more we know and map out our own unconsciousness. And that's where real, powerful healing can happen. So again, there's this standing on the margins of world as the bridge. And that's the other thing that Chiron does. By reverberating back and forth, by standing on the margins, he creates bridges between these dimensions. So what? So messengers, angels, healing can pass through from the upper world to the lower world. For those who participated in Patricia's event, what did she do? She took us all into the underworld. Very powerful. And then she took us all out of the underworld into the upper world. And how many of you felt a release from this process? Did it not feel good to go all the way down and then to come back up again? Because it's like we're going down there and we're scooping up all of this unresolved residue from the past and then bringing it into our own consciousness, integrating it back into ourselves by shining our own light of awareness into those places. And of course, the unconsciousness is so vast and so huge, we're going to be doing this, all of us, for the rest of our lives. Our unconsciousness, in evolutionary astrology, could be said to be the soul, which could be said to have, from our human perspective, almost innumerable lifetimes. And so there is this ever-growing awareness of our own unconsciousness, which is us healing ourselves and simultaneously coming into our power. And that's the goal here, is that we can go into the upper worlds, the lower worlds, not be afraid, not be snared by anything, through clearing out these channels. That way we can become great healers ourselves. And so here we are, up and down, back and forth, standing on the margins. And the symbolism that we often see associated with shamanism is, of course, the snake. Because what does the snake do? It's a vibration. It's a sine wave. The sine wave is sort of the most fundamental symbol in life. Because you're taking the circle, which is one, which is everything, and now you're adding time, which is sort of like stretching that circle out. So we have this reverberation. That's everything in the creation as far as we know. That is not the circle. That is not already one. That is not whole. The experience of the wholeness is experienced through this reverberation up and down, if that makes sense. And so the dimensional bridge between forces of nature, between the inner and outer planets. Of course, we'll talk about how Chiron's orbit goes between inside of Saturn and outside of Uranus, which is a big deal. Because Uranus is the breakdown of the three-dimensional reality, our own prison-like limitations. It's sort of getting outside of time. That, Uranus is the sky, the upper world, heaven. And Chiron is the messenger, is the shaman that allows us to travel in between these dimensions and really take us out towards Neptune, which is unconditional love. And so this is between time and fate and infinite freedom is where Chiron reverberates between. Now, I find that when you're going through a huge dimensional shift, there can be a purging of some kind. I find, sometimes when I'm on a plane and I'm flying from one place to the next, particularly if I'm flying back home, which represents the past to me, that dimensional shift will sometimes make me sick. It's like the dimensional shift is so severe in itself that there's a cathartic releasing process in just going in between these dimensions. And so again, going between vastly different dimensions is what the Chiron capability is. It can be culture shock. And again, Chiron is the bridge who bridges all dimensions together through the understanding of love. The lowest hell realms, the highest heaven realms are bridged together through love. That's what Chiron is. He is the reflection of our own nature and capability within ourselves to do this bridging in our own world. This is healing separation, is what Chiron does. No more separation between these vastly different dimensions. Chiron carries that loving burden of being the sacrifice so he himself can be broken down and split into the entire creation, the universe himself. That way all dimensions can be connected and all fallen beings can be redeemed. So Chiron goes down into Tartarus after he's on the rock. And this is similar to us, and similar to these stories with these sacrificial beings. It's going down into the underworld. Sort of festering now there, but in festering there, it is again our awareness, becoming aware of the parts of ourself in which suffering, woundedness, and trauma has occurred. And trauma is when we experience something where there is such varying dimensions that we can't process it. It's too much. Like when we think of the glyph for Aquarius, which is associated with trauma, it's like up, down, very severe. The difference between hot and cold. It's like if you, stick your hand in something that's really hot or really cold, and you can't even tell what the difference is. It's that, being something that's so different, it's impossible to register almost. And so trauma is when that distance is so severe, we have to separate that consciousness off. But when we go back into it, as we did this morning with Patricia, as we can do ourselves, simply through talking about, through sharing, through bringing our own awareness into places where trauma has happened, that restoration happens. It is not a matter of seeing those below us as having our hearts, it's not a matter of saying, oh, those bad people in hell. Oh, what did they do in their childhood to generate such a terrible outcome, that asshole. It's compassion that allows us to have our hearts break when we see the pain and the suffering in others. It's like we can detect that smell of suffering, and it almost draws compassionate souls to it. And so our hearts are broken until we acquire a taste of it. That's a very high octave truth of the human being. We develop a taste for brokenheartedness because brokenheartedness is the mechanism which allows our love to grow and allows our compassion to grow and allows us to help others more and more. We develop a taste for suffering because it is what allows the story of love to unfold. And so again, in many of the talks we've heard this idea that maybe it's not so much about ascension, it's about integration, as if we came into this planet where there is suffering happening everywhere for very good reason. Our souls want to be here. We're attracted to this because this is where beauty unfolds. And we'll talk about what beauty is. What is real beauty? It's a very good question. Is it appearances? Is it what smells good? Is it what makes you feel comfortable? Or is beauty describing something that is so deep, it's like we can't even register what it actually is? It's this just telling of our true nature that is beyond all things. And it makes us, like we just get struck by it. There's this bliss, there's this ecstasy in it. And there's something beautiful about the full spectrum, just like the rose, which has both thorns upon it as well as these beautiful, wonderfully fragrant blossoms. And so suffering is not meaningless. That's a very important point. When we're stuck in our suffering, when we feel pain, it's not because we may be doing something wrong, or somebody else is suffering, maybe not because they did something wrong. Or it's their karma. Oh, look at that guy, he just face planted. Bad karma, you know? Yeah. It's very easy to sort of just, I don't need to go there into that hell realm, it's just their karma. Leave it to it. I'm good over here. That type of self-righteousness that's the antithesis of compassion has nothing to do with reality. And someone who has a strong Chiron signature in their chart may experience a tremendous amount of suffering in their life. And it may not be karma. It may be because that soul chose to go through those experiences in order to initiate themselves into becoming a healer and to have their heart ripped open. Which is what we're all doing here, by the way. That's what the human experience is about. It's about having our hearts ripped open. Like we said in the Lucifer talk, everyone you know will die. You will experience the pain of separation from everybody that you love. You will experience heartbreak. That can be a very big problem, can't it? If you're seeing it that way. But if you see that as a gift to you and as an advantage of initiating you into something that is beyond what the mundane world believes about what human beings are. And of course, in the mundane world, we don't talk about death. We go to funerals, and it's very awkward because we don't even know what to do, And it's just because we've forgotten that there's beauty in the heartbreak. And so the Sacred Heart is a very interesting symbol for this. It depicts this spiritual ecstasy, which is the simultaneous union and separation, the pain of being separate from God and one with God at the same time, is our relationship to God, as far as I can tell. And so these two figures are oftentimes depicted with these Sacred Hearts. And notice how they have this face of serenity at the same time. That's quite crazy. I'm not sure if they were quite so pasty white in their in their actual historical incarnation. But there is this simultaneous burning in their heart and this peacefulness simultaneously, because they are resting in that ultimate nature of being one with spiritual bliss and not fighting against it the way most of us do, because spiritual bliss is way too much for us. As soon as we get a little taste of it, a little droplet, we're just like, okay, that's enough for right now. I'll go back to my ego now, thank you very much. I will flip on my television, forget about everything, and go to sleep. And we shouldn't blame ourselves for being that way either, because most of us aren't on the level of this yet. And the grace of God means that we can ease ourselves into that throughout many, many, many incarnations and lifetimes. And yet there are particular souls who are really gung-ho about getting there. And those are oftentimes the ones that experience significant suffering and pain in their life. And we should never look at such souls and be just like, oh, karma, that sucks. I wonder what you did in your past life to get so punished in this one. This is not how we see other people or nature or reality once we start to understand what fundamental nature and reality is. So here's the Chiron quote from the Bible. Whoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Wherever Chiron is in your chart is your cross. That's where you experience woundedness or suffering pain in some way, shape, or form. It may not be literal. You may not be stabbed. It may be more philosophical or mental. It may be cellular memories coming from past lives that are just being triggered by the most subtle thing. And oftentimes, it's very interesting when I'm working with clients, there can be this, oh, well, I didn't really get traumatized or suffer as a child. There was nothing that happened. I didn't get raped. My village didn't get burned down. My parents didn't physically abuse me. And that may not necessarily matter at all. Sometimes the most slight and subtle and seemingly not important thing can be the catalyst for a cellular memory of something that was very deep and very traumatic. And so trauma and woundedness can happen in a very deep way, even if there isn't something so apparently happening on the surface. That's a very important thing to understand when we're dealing with ourselves and when we're dealing with other people. That way we're not just like, I don't understand. Why are they such a crybaby? Why are they feeling such a huge emotional reaction when nothing at all happened? Well, there's always a reason. Always. That's something that Patricia made evident in her talk. When you feel a reaction, there's a reason for it. You won't feel a reaction for no reason. And feelings is one of the best ways, I personally have found, to find out what your past lives are. You got a random phobia for some reason, that's a huge catalyst of fear being generated by something seemingly subtle. Well, there's a deep story attached to that, isn't that? You can let your feelings and emotions inform you what my past experiences are, so you can bring your healing awareness to those places so you can heal yourself and come into your power. So this does have to do with cellular memories, where redundant wounding has reoccurred, and this redundant wounding can oftentimes happen throughout a series of lifetimes, is what Chiron can depict in the chart. And it's important to understand as well that the wound is there until we are ready to heal it, and there's no rush. People who experience a significant amount of trauma, you don't ever want to rush them or ourselves into being healed. Baby steps. Baby steps, our woundedness is serving us until we are ready and comfortable to heal it. That's the understanding of Chiron, is that our wound serves us. Our wound is a gift to us. And we can slowly approach it and get to know it and form an intimate relationship with it, which is inevitably what creates this turnaround point. Once we start to form a romantic relationship to our own woundedness, pretty far out, isn't it? Yeah. That's when you start to take the higher perspective, when you start to say, oh my goodness, this woundedness that I've been forming a relationship with, chances are for several decades, because it takes several decades for us to really heal some of our deep wounds. Now I'm seeing the gift in it. That's what we're going to look at when we take Chiron through the zodiac. So what is beauty? Is it merely something that appears pleasant? Is it that beauty what is it that beauty means to you? When you hear beautiful music, is it merely pleasant, or is there something more? Is there a certain richness? Is there a certain seductiveness to it? What type of movies do we like to watch? Do we like to watch movies that are just purely knock-knock jokes? Would you like to watch a movie that was 3 hours of knock-knock jokes? How many of your favorite movies is just a flat line the entire time and nothing happens? You know, one of my friends has an ongoing joke. He's going to make some video or something where it's a guy and he's experiencing all of his past lives and they're just completely mundane and nothing happens. It's hilarious, isn't it? It's just like one day he gets a shovel, you know. One life he moves up a level and now he's, you know, digging stuff. This is not what the human experience is. We get full spectrum experiences here on Earth, and there's a huge advantage to that we oftentimes don't honor. And that is, if we were just in heaven realms all the time and, you know, it would be very sensual, very blissful, cotton candy slides and magic choirs of angels making the most beautiful sounds ever. Well, it's like we would be hypnotized. We would be perpetually, catatonically frozen in that bliss. And if we were in the lowest hell realms where being shredded endlessly by demons and hot magma and whatever you want to imagine, these realms are you know, mostly conceptual in certain respects. Well, we wouldn't be able to do anything in those situations ever because it's so torturous. But here on Earth, right in the middle, Earth is a middle world, which means that we have plenty of heaven and earth here. That contrast in between heaven and earth, or heaven and hell, is what awakens our hearts. It's what awakens our hearts into being compassionate beings. That way we can serve others. You experience goodness, so you know that that's what you love, and then you see suffering and you realize that you want to alleviate that suffering. And that taste for being a compassionate soul ends up being something more rich and more tasty and more flavorful than just being in the cotton candy slides and paradise realms forever, because it's just a flat line and there's nothing really happening. There's no story, there's no richness, there's no love. Do not surrender your grief so quickly. Let it cut more deeply. Let it ferment and season you, as few human or divine ingredients can. Something is missing in my heart tonight that has made my eyes so soft and my voice so tender and my need for God so absolutely clear. Do you guys hear it? Do you hear the advantage in this? This is what awakens our spiritual journey. The richness is in sometimes the sadness. It feels so good to have that heart ripped open. That way we can have our longing for God and this ecstasy awakened. So we can start to look in the chart. So what is going to be, Chiron in the chart is going to be this simultaneous where the wound is and where transcendence can happen. Chiron is the key that can take us into the spiritual realms, into being a healer. And so, the wound is where redundant, painful experiences oftentimes happen. It's like Patricia had us find a certain quote, a certain word that we're often saying again and again and again. Where we feel shunned, ignored, unloved, where we perceive separation or abandonment. Potentially where cellular memories carry such feelings from past lives into the current lifetime. And this is where transcendence happens, the area where our particular experience of suffering awakens a compassion to heal and help those suffering in a similar way. That's going to be what Chiron is in the chart. Where you have suffered, where you have experienced pain, just like Chiron being abandoned by his parents and then he takes in children. That's your special gift. That is your medicine that you have to offer to others in a way that nobody else can. Because not everybody experiences suffering in the same way. Where you experience suffering is where you have the opportunity to learn from it and then offer the medicines to others. This is where healing awareness meets our wounds and bridges and weaves the past, where the woundedness originally happened, with the future, where realizations, tools, and discoveries allows us to transcend woundedness and our sense of personal suffering, so that way it is no longer identified as personally suffering. It's identified as something completely different. An initiation into the transcendental, spiritual, angelic nature, which is freaking awesome. It's not mundane. It's where mastery can occur through understanding the wound story and archetype, and where tools and methods of healing and modalities can come full circle and be shared back to the collective. And this is oftentimes the case with the Chiron return, which happens around age 50, where this full circle can happen, where we look back at our past and our woundedness, and we see it from the higher perspective. Wow, they made fun of me. Wow, I got hurt by this again and again and again. And it made me who I am. It made me who I am. It shaped me in the fire. To be something that is not just like some naive rich kid who lives in a mansion and sheltered gates and has no idea what the real world is. As if that's a life that anyone should really desire to live. That's not life. That's a denial of life, isn't it? When we build up those walls and we try to prevent suffering from coming in, what happens is this denial of what life actually is. And people go crazy. They oftentimes become presidents. And then, they try to create their delusional reality and enforce it on others. There's no compassion awakened in their souls, right? Can we even imagine a world where presidents were compassionate? What would that look like? What would the measure be? If instead of the president is supposed to dictate over the rest of the world, well, the standard of our nation is compassion. What is the actual measure of someone's spiritual evolution? Is compassion. It is the only spiritual measure that I have seen. Compassion.
I think Jimmy Carter was compassionate.
Yeah. They've existed. Yeah. And he's humble, isn't he? Humble, sort of poor roots. And think about the advantage he had therefore. Having humble roots.
Make sure he's a very one.
Yeah, he wasn't that effective.
He was a very effective actor as president.
Yeah, and he's still around, I believe.
Yes, he is.
Amazing. And so this understanding is what? That very bright lights come out of the darkest places. Have you not seen that? Have you not seen some of the most evolved souls come out of absolutely treacherous childhoods?
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? What does that say about their souls?
Shows the wound.
It also shows how powerful healers they are. Oh, wow. That is one fucked up family. Wow. That is hell on earth. Send me there. I will take on all of their shit in my DNA. I will be raised by monsters. I will have no actual help in the world, so I will have to find it all myself in order to heal that DNA out of humanity. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I bow down to those souls who come out of that suffering, and I recognize them. And they usually don't recognize themselves because they're so humble, they're so compassionate, and yet that's the quality we're talking about. That is the measure of spiritual evolution. So Chiron in the chart. How do you tell if you have a strong Chiron? Well, it's like any other planet. If there's a lot of aspects connecting it to a lot of other planets, this is going to be a Chironic life. Whatever planets are touching your Chiron through any aspect is going to carry that type of Chironic story of having to overcome, of having to come into a level of transcendence in order to actualize the highest octave of what that planet is. So, for example, we think of Mars. Willpower, the fighter, very strong and individual. Well, Mars, an aspect of Chiron, may not naturally show that because the willpower, the strength, the warrior-like quality can experience wounding in life. And that wounding doesn't mean that that's a permanent situation. It means that they have to learn to use their willpower in a way which will ultimately be healing in relation to whatever that wound that caused that willpower to be shut down in the first place to be actualized. This is a healing journey that we're talking about. What is the spiritual journey? The spiritual journey is the healing journey. Jeffrey Green makes it completely clear that all souls are wounded in this day and age. All of them. If we're willing to be honest, we will admit that we've experienced woundedness in some way, shape, or form. And our spiritual journey is in fact our own individual journey of healing. And that's very important because many of us get high off of the spiritual go-go juice and we start doing all the practices, doing all the right dances, wearing the right clothes. And what does that necessarily have to do with the healing journey? Is it actually helping you? Is it actually bringing you out of your restrictiveness and your catatonic state? That way you can actually help other people. The spiritual journey and the healing journey is one and the same. Where you experience woundedness in the past is your initiation into your healing journey. If we are not yet celebrating that, it means that we're probably human, and that's okay. But inevitably, we are brought into a place when we commit to the healing journey, which is the spiritual journey, which brings us into forgiveness, which brings us into the highest realization of what the heart is and what the heart can give. That wound is a gift. It's what creates the healing journey to happen in the very first place so we can know what spirituality is truly all about. So here is Chiron floating out there in space. Isn't it remarkable how a rock can carry all this information? I don't think I'll ever understand it personally. In 2011, just a random fact, they discovered that Chiron has rings, they're pretty sure. And Chiron's very interesting because, again, he goes way far out. Deep space, outside of Uranus. Then he comes way inside of Jupiter's orbit. This is a 50.7-year orbit. The Chiron return happens between age 49 and 51. This is a highly elliptical orbit. And this is interesting too because the other highly elliptical orbit is Pluto, the other planet that has so much to do with the underworld. And so because of this highly elliptical orbit, Chiron spends about 8.25 years in Aries when he's furthest from the sun, and right now he's far from the sun in Pisces. And then just about 1.75 years in Libra. He moves very fast when he's in the opposite sign, around Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, moves very fast. And then in Pisces, Aries, moving very slow. Now this is interesting because there are particular times in history, and this is from Martin Lass's book on Chiron. There are particular times in history, therefore, where the entire collective is experiencing more Chiron transits. And the last time this would have been happening is the early 1990s, the late 1980s. And now we're at this point right here. 2017, Chiron's very far away. There are barely any Chiron transits going on. And what Martin Lass correlates this to is because there's less Chiron transits going on, there's less personal healing opportunities going on, because again, Chiron transits is like being juiced. We get humbled. We get brought into our spiritual journey. We get awakened to the human experience. And when there's less Chiron transit going on, he says that there is less compassion for others in the world. Isn't that interesting? Because we're experiencing xenophobia at an all-time high right now. Fear of other nations, fear of other religions, which is what? The antithesis of compassion. Oh, they're different. We don't care about their suffering. Drop bombs on them. Because we have no understanding of our own humanity. That's a very interesting correlation that he made there. Okay, so where to move next?
Chiron reads the houses?
Yes, we're going to take Chiron through the signs, but first what I'd like to do is you all get comfortable, relax, close your eyes, and come into your feelings. And I'm just going to read a short Chironic piece here. Just allow yourself to feel what this is about and come into your heart. We're going to invite Chiron into our space. So go inside, go to God, relax, relax, relax. A light, warm, glowing, approaching, a stoic silence, and it is as though the air around us bows. The light is pierced open by a white, hot, burning beam of love, pours out like a golden stream. His hand rests upon his heart, which explodes in ecstasy. He moves as though falling, piercing through space like an arrow, penetrating into the hearts of all that set eyes on him. He carves through dimensions, wielding the power of burning love and compassion. He throws himself into the fiery pit of his heart's ecstasy, sacrificing himself into the position of the dimensional bridger, holding open the passageways to the upper and lower worlds so that souls, medicines, and messengers may transcend their limited containers that burst into their powerful and triumphant nature. Heroes, like flowers bursting from buds into full bloom, which then eventually drop and disintegrate into a dust, crushed into medicine and oil. To be in the presence of Chiron is to have your heart burst. For it is to experience the disintegration of the old reality, the Halloran of the past, and be pulled through the hot furnace of heartbreak, the steam engine of white-hot love and truth that pulverizes the heart into pure love, bliss, and ecstasy, so that all that remains is bliss and ecstasy. Every particle around is absorbed like a moth running into the flame. Every inch of us is humbled and purified. Every heart can breathe deeper, can drink deeper its own sweet nectar. Every soul here can connect with his or her most innermost being. Every soul here is reminded of his or her innermost purpose. and is deeply refreshed and uplifted. For no matter how far we stray from our heart, we can return by the grace of love. Can you feel it? So I didn't realize the time's running so short. I'm going to go through the signs fairly quickly. I'm going to share some stories from my own chart, and then for anyone who would like to share their own, they're more than welcome. Again, where Chiron is in your chart is going to show symbolically where some woundedness has happened that initiates us into becoming healers of that very same thing in which the initial woundedness happened. And so Chiron in Aries is going to be, or Chiron in the first house, or Chiron in aspect to Mars, is some loss of Aries, self-assertion, self-worth, purpose, direction, the willpower to initiate. It's like being punched in the stomach. Chiron in Aries can be that. Oh, you're not powerful. Oh, you can't do what you want. It can be early childhood experiences. And this initiates a healing journey of finding our own willpower, of finding our own strength, to have the confidence to initiate our own journey. So that way, someone with Chiron in Aries can be a healer of other souls who have lost their own direction. Chiron in Aries can uplift other souls into being powerful leaders themselves. And Chiron in Aries can be that type of leader who is going to have compassion for others and not be a dictator, but include the full spectrum of approaching other people. In a general sense, one way of looking at the woundedness of Chiron will show the lower octave of the opposite sign. So someone in their Chiron and Aries wound can be a people pleaser, worshipping other strong individuals. Wherever Chiron is in the chart, projection onto others can happen. So, for example, Chiron in Gemini can be a wounded ability to communicate. Should I stay in order, guys? I have trouble staying in order. Okay, we'll try to stay in order. Okay. Chiron in Taurus, deep insecurity. This can be poverty complex, a sense of there being no ground, no place to return to. It can be issues around beauty. What is beauty? Is it the body? Is it the amount of money that we have? There can be issues around femininity. This can express itself through clinginess or avoidance or creating a comfort bubble. And yet with Taurus there can be that frog in the well syndrome. Impoverished and in a limited world, but we're just going to stay there. We're just going to stay there. It's just how it is. What can someone with Chiron and Taurus do? They're on the healing journey of discovering what real beauty is. What real love is. Finding the kingdom of God within themselves. The kingdom of heaven within themselves. Finding what that true home space is. Taurus is about that space on earth. Creating stability in other people's lives. Being a foundation in other people's lives. Being that meditative breath of the Zen Buddhist who is at home in nothingness and tastes the beauty in nothingness can be Chiron and Taurus. Now we'll go to Chiron and Gemini. This is a wounded intellect, a wounded capability to communicate. People with Chiron and Gemini will sometimes feel stupid. They've had experiences of going to school and the teacher says you're dumb or you're not getting good grades and why don't you speak up more? Because there's a very particular way of thinking that we all get trained in this Western world. And yet Chiron and Gemini is brilliant, is genius, and communicates differently and can reach other people who communicate differently. Can speak to the autistic child, can speak to animals, can teach new ways of learning and communicating. Chiron in Cancer is the sense of being unnurtured, unsupported, the lost child, abandonment, undeserving care, There can be woundedness with the family, no nurturance, a withdrawing from love or smothering others with love. And yet Chiron in Cancer can create a real sense of family, the tribe. They can be the master nurturer. They can learn how to take care of themselves in the way that they weren't taken care of in their early childhood. Do you see how this works? You don't have a mother as a child. What does that mean? You must become initiated into becoming your own mother. Which means that you get connected with the mother inside of yourself, which makes you a beacon, a fountainhead of the mother for others. Chiron in Leo, wounded self-expression, wounded spontaneity, the wounded inner child, wounded creativity. I have to grow up too fast can be the experience. Or you have to be mature. You're not allowed to do what you want to do. Worshipping others with talents instead of owning your own. What can Chiron and Leo do? Their healing journey is in reconnecting with their own inner child. They're helping to heal other inner childs. By playing, by being spontaneous and giving permission to other souls to do the same. By being incredibly creative, wearing crazy clothes, having lots of fun. Jimi Hendrix has a North Node Chiron conjunction. Chiron in Virgo. By the way, there's going to be less and less people with the Virgo, the Libra, the Scorpio. A sense of incompleteness, being scattered, being impure. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. I made a mistake. A sense of fragmentation. Chiron in Virgo. There's a healing of the body that happens this. Finding of your human role with Chiron in Virgo. Finding wholeness in being a human being. That our impurity is okay. And in fact, our sense of being imperfect is what gives us the opportunity to always improve. Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, you sort of touched on the opposing house where your Chiron is.
Yes, so when I'm talking about these, I should clarify. This is going to be Chiron in Virgo, Chiron in the 6th house, or Chiron in aspect to Mercury. So you guys understand that? The signs are associated with houses and planets, and they all go together. And when you're looking at the chart, you can therefore include all the archetypes that are connected to your Chiron. Chiron in Libra is isolation. I'm alone, I'm incomplete, I'm not with my perfect other, so there is a sense of something missing in me, or someone missing. There's a sense of imbalance, a search for balance, harmony, grace. This is going to be similar to Taurus, ruled by Venus. They're both ruled by Venus. This is a search for what true love is by becoming complete in yourself. That way this person can be a master healer of working with others, working with couples, working with groups, and creating that sense of wholeness, having already found that and completed that in yourself. Chiron in Scorpio can be the deep fear of loss, abandonment, being manipulated by others. The fear of the dark, the complexity of life, what death represents, these things that are beyond us, they're scary. There can be this sense of this paranoia. There's a plot against us. Or an obsession, trying to escape from fears. Chiron in Scorpio can be the master sexual healer, can be the death doula, can inevitably find the juice, the richness in death, what creates this loving openness. And being able to reach other people in a deep, powerful way, meeting other people's unconsciousness. Chiron in Sagittarius, a sense of meaningless, a sense of purposelessness. Boundarylessness can be frightening. The sense that I'm not connected with my wisdom. The sense that there is no truth. Jupiter, Chiron in the 9th house. Chiron in Sagittarius can be this existentialism. What is God? What is the truth? What is the purpose of my life that initiates the journey for finding that in a deep and profound way? To be a teacher of what the truth actually is and not just spreading somebody else's idea of the truth. Finding it in the deep way, coming out of the existential nature of humanity by acknowledging that part of humanity. And finding the purpose that's born out of that. Chiron in Capricorn is the sense of being unrecognized, unappreciated. I work so hard. I have jumped through so many hoops. I have climbed the corporate ladder, and nobody is there to give me pats on the back. Nobody is recognizing my sense of accomplishment, which initiates what? The journey of being your own recognition, of giving your own pats on the back. It's the initiation into being that mature person, that foundation, that war veteran, wise elder. You know, it's like if you're the oldest, if you're the wisest, who's going to be there to throw a party for you when you're holding it down? That's the initiation. Father doesn't give you pats on the back, creates the healing journey of giving yourself pats on the back, so you get connected with the Father in yourself, so you can be a paternal, supportive guidance to others in the world. Finding that mastery in yourself. Chiron in Aquarius. Aspect to Uranus in the 11th house. The alien, the outsider, stranger in a strange land. Is this my true dimension? Is this my true home? Being isolated, being different. My stepdaughter has Chiron in Aquarius, and we were at the playground, and I watched her approach the other children, and they all immediately walk away from her. We're not allowed to talk with children who aren't from our school. And I watched that redundant experience with her again and again and again. She comes in as this bright light. I want to play with you. I want to help you. Sorry, the rules say no. You're an ET. You know, you're different. That can be that Chiron in Aquarius. And then what? Initiate the journey in recognizing your own uniqueness. And that's where the gem is going to be. Oh yeah, you're different from other people. Oh yeah, that's a gift. You have a perspective, you have an understanding that other people do not have. So you can be a teacher and a healer of that, and you can heal other people, accepting and embracing their own uniqueness. Is this making sense, guys?
Yeah.
I hope I'm not boring you. It is. Okay.
Just on that one. So you said that it relates to any planet that is in the house where Chiron is. I was asking about the opposing house, like in Aquarius it would be Leo. And what about all the aspects to it? Like if you've got, I have Chiron in Aquarius, and there's it's square 4 planets. So I'm like, is it related to all those planets plus Leo?
All the above. It's you know, in zodiac signs, the polarity, it's like Leo and Aquarius is like the shadow and the light. You have to have shadow, you have to have light, so there's always that relationship.
Yeah.
And again, you know, what's the negative side of Leo is the top of the pyramid complex. It's lonely to be king, right? So sometimes you'll get a hint of what the Chiron placement is by seeing the negative qualities of the opposite sign, if that makes sense. But don't get too hung up on that. It's kind of a general thing. So Chiron in Pisces, this is where Chiron is right now. What are we all collectively healing? Is our soul's innocence. Is our sense of purpose. Connect to God. Our faith is healing. We're coming out of this age of Pisces where many of us have had our faiths very wounded. And there's opportunity for us to heal this sense of innocence. What is spirituality about? Did your soul actually become tainted? Are you actually in a fallen state? Did you become disconnected from God? Are you actually being punished? Absolutely not. We are always connected to God. That type of connection to spirit and sharing that spiritual wisdom is the journey of someone with Chiron in Pisces. Restoring their own innocence. Understanding that we're always in the perfect place at the perfect time and everything is a part of divine flow. Coming out of the sense that that's not there. And becoming a master of that and sharing that to other people. Of course, we all go through this experience together that we're separated and alone and we're tainted. And yet we're not simultaneously. Is that inconceivable Pisces nature. So, do any of you have any questions before I'm going to use some examples from my chart? And I believe that we're going over time as well. We started late, so, you know, there's nothing coming after this. You guys can go get dinner whenever you please. You don't have to feel bad about it.
You haven't even gone over time yet.
Okay. Or we haven't even gone over time. Okay, whatever. So here's my chart. And I'm actually going to begin by explaining what my past life regression was that was just a couple hours ago. And then point some things out in my chart. So, go back to being little little boy born into royalty. In evolutionary astrology, you begin with Pluto. Pluto's in my 5th house of Leo, south node's in the south node's in Leo. Okay, so past lives of regality, Leo, being in front of stages, so on and so forth. So I'm the king's son, right? And my Chiron, by the way, is conjunct Jupiter in Cancer. It makes quite a number of aspects in my chart. Hanging out with my family, it's like mother does not exist. She's not even there. She's just a fly on the wall. That's where she has to be in this particular past life. Hey, Dad, he's an evil tyrant. I don't want to do anything that he's doing. I don't like how he rules the kingdom. But I hope that one day when I assume that position, to be able to do something better than what he's done. So there's this sense of what? Wounded nurturance, authority. I've got to be the king. I've got to be the man. Well, my Chiron, Jupiter, is opposite to Saturn. Whenever you see Chiron opposite to Saturn, it's almost always the case where there's some type of oppressive experience in childhood between the parents and the child. Chiron in Leo opposite to Saturn, you're not allowed to be an artist. You've got to be an electric engineer. You know? So there's this disconnect from femininity, there's this oppressiveness coming from the father figure. Now, planetary rulerships is also really important in astrology. So the way that works is Chiron is in Cancer, is ruled by the moon, which is in what? Taurus. No sensuality. Wounded sensuality, wounded connection to my own body. My moon and my Pluto, opposite to Pluto, are square the moon's nodes. In past lives, I was so denied my own sensual experiences that they pretty much were like trauma, separated from myself. And the ruler of my south node in Leo is my sun in Gemini. Where am I naturally going to go coming out of this trauma and this oppressiveness? Into outer space, into my mind, into creating fantasies, into being in denial of my body, and saying that heaven is the only place that we should be going to and deny my earthly experience, so on and so forth. And so in that life, I don't want to keep going on about it, but I want to start connecting it to what I experience in this life. Born to a very similar patriarchal father, there's this complete denial of sensuality. There's, going long periods without food, stomach cramps. It's just completely foreign. It's just, my parents are very puritanical. Sensual enjoyment is selfish, so on and so forth. So again, Chiron is in Cancer. Moon is in Taurus, opposite to Pluto. And these are the skipped steps. This is what I'm trying to integrate now, is coming into my body and my senses. How am I going to nurture myself is the journey of Chiron in Cancer. Now, this oppressiveness was so long outstanding in past lives, so on and so forth, that when I was young, I wished that I was a woman instead of a man. Because for some reason in my family, there was this idea that the man was responsible for doing and carrying all the work, and women, they just could do whatever they wanted, kind of. What does that even mean? It's almost time to restart your device. Okay. That's the first time I've ever seen that. So, and also we have a Chiron-Jupiter conjunction. Woundedness having to do with religion can be Chiron-Jupiter connection. When I was younger, I did a really hard-ass Hare Krishna phase where, sensuality is completely bad, sex is completely evil, denying all of those things. Again, just trying to get to heaven, deny this earthly experience, is reflective of some of my past lives where some of that could have been imposed upon me, or that's just how I was conditioned. But again, it's like, my father and his father, they're coming from these experiences of, Grandpa was a Cancer, Grandma was a Capricorn with Moon and Scorpio. She just bossed him around. He did whatever he wanted to do, or she did whatever she wanted to do. Father was raised in such a way where 2 younger daughters, they can just play where father does all the work, does all the chores, all the cleansing. That's the world that I'm born into. And so there's this wanting to deny my own masculinity. We see that this Chiron is square to my Mars in Aries. Some people look at this Mars in Aries in the 10th and they're just like, wow, you've got so much willpower, you're going to be so successful in your job, so on and so forth. No. Square to Chiron. I'm not a competitive person. I've never been a competitive person. Because that willpower was so wounded and so denied. I didn't want that. I didn't want that responsibility. Again, reflective of this past life. And so, what am I healing is, again, Chiron and Cancer is how to be a nurturer in myself. No mother, no nurturer there. I'm tapping that into myself. What does someone who is healing Cancer in themselves like to do? Take long baths, sometimes pampering of the senses, just enjoying a nice meal and burning incense. This is my own path of healing, believe it or not, even though it seemed to me, years ago, paradoxical to what the spiritual journey would be. And yes, it's very empowering, and it makes me more of a nurturing person, so that way I can nurture others by allowing them to do the same thing. Oftentimes I tell clients, your spiritual practice is to pamper the living shit out of yourself. Honestly, because the north nodes of Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn for all souls are in Cancer. We all have to learn how to pamper ourselves, don't we? Because we're born into a Capricorn, patriarchal machine where it's about how much you produce, and if you take time for yourself, you're lazy. And what happens is we're denying our own senses. And then we become less in our body. We become more rigid, we become more hard, we become more like an asshole, and then we find the tyrants that we do in our world, which are what? Mostly wounded children. Become the leaders of the church and the nation, so on and so forth, because they don't know how to take care and pamper themselves. So much of my own sharing and healing of other people is based around that. How to actually take care of yourself. And interestingly, one of the technologies that I found that helps me the most, and in a minute I'm going to open it up if anyone wants to share the story, is the sensory deprivation tank. Yeah? Because it's like a return to the womb. It's like you're just floating out there in nothingness. And there's this being hugged by thousands of pounds of Epsom salt. And coming into the body and being able to relax in a way that's almost forced. You have to relax in the sensory deprivation tank. Otherwise you're going to freak out because you're in a claustrophobic space. And so if anybody would like to talk about their own Chiron, their own woundedness, how they overcame that woundedness, and potentially any practices or technologies that they found in relation to that, you're more than welcome to share. And again, this is totally...